And hello, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Baghurst, and today I'm joined by a special guest, Jason Butcher. He is a sports manager for field hockey in New Zealand. Jason, I find it ironic you're wearing a New York Yankees hat, I've got to say. But thanks for joining me. If you wouldn't mind, just share a little bit about your background and how you got involved in field hockey.
Yeah. Hi, mate. So I guess the short version, it's a long story, but maybe we'll unpack that as we go. I was brought up on a dairy farm in a regional area of southwest Western Australia in Australia, and I had three younger brothers, and we sort of lived this life with my father, who was a pretty prominent sort of leader in our regional community. Is an Australian Football League, AFL coach and player, and he coached most of our sporting teams as well. Basketball, hockey, and AFL were sort of the things we did, and so our whole family life was essentially sport, and a lot of it was following him around, being a coach and a leader in the community. Sunday night at the pub, managing men, messy situations, half-time at the AFL footy. And in those days, AFL footy in particular was pretty rough and rugged in the regional sort of country community. So that was our upbringing, sort of watching our father, who was quite famous in that area, and how he sort of led, and then talking about it in the car on the way home and all those sort of things. And then I sort of had a playing career, I guess, in those different sports to various degrees at sort of reasonable levels. And then I sort of fell into, I guess, becoming a professional coach, as probably most people's stories, a bit of fortune. But I coached a national underage team for a small Northern Territory, one of the small sort of state territories in Australia. And we won the national championship, which is sort of unheard of at the time. The Northern Territory at the time had 0.02% of the hockey population in Australia.
Wow.
So you're talking about a place that competes on the national stage with 6 club teams versus these massive states like New South Wales, who have a number of massive associations that are all, 10 times as big as that. So, and then at that time, the institute coach, so Australia has a system where you've got the AIS, and then you have each state and territory has an institute that sits under that. That's the high performance sort of infrastructure. And the hockey coach at the time in the area had just resigned, and for however reason, all the timing was right. And they basically, I had an interview, but they wanted a local person or someone that was sort of part of the hockey community to be there, because people were coming in and out and leaving that job, and somehow I ended up being becoming a professional coach within the space of about 12 months, and not really having done much coaching at all, even though I had that sort of upbringing, I guess. And then from that time on, over the last 20 years, I've sort of traveled the world and had a whole range of amazing and diverse opportunities in sport and coaching. And it's sort of become, I guess, the thread of my life since then.
When you talk about falling into these coaching positions, yes, maybe there's a little bit of good fortune and chance associated with that, but it's not because you were an ineffective coach. And so I'm curious, if you go back to the beginnings, what was it that allowed you to be successful in an environment where you kind of alluded to teams up here don't win, yet you did? So I'm curious how that happened.
There's lots of good fortune in these sort of stories, but one of them was we had a group of young men. So 2 of them, Desmond Abbott, ended up becoming a World 11 player, played for the Kookaburras Australia, and another young kid, Joel Carroll, who played for Australia. Both really unique, amazing talents. Both went to the Olympics. And then there was a cluster of kids around them in that same sort of age group that either played national juniors, went to Junior World Cups, and then another group under that who sort of all became part of this sort of group that were on this mission to take on the world, if you like. And I sort of fell into that group, and I guess I was a younger coach, and for whatever skills and attributes I had that I'd learned, or the sort of person I was at the time, I mean, my hockey knowledge was okay because I was playing in the Australian Hockey League at the time. but I think it was more the timing of who I was and the relationships I was able to build with those boys, and the fact that they were on this sort of collective mission and they had this brotherhood where they were so close anyway. And, I probably just got lucky with the buttons that I pushed and the levers that we pulled. And I had a great support cast at the time. My manager, a guy named Michael McGregor, was really close to those guys. He was, a great man in Northern Territory hockey as well. And, so I think it was just the relationships and the trust, and however we sort of built that, we got a bit of momentum and we managed to work our way through. We ended up winning the final. We scraped through everything, made the semis just, and came from behind to win the semi. And there was a number of boys injured, including Desmond, and we won the finals 3-0. Just had a perfect day, and I look back and it was like just everything went right, and that was the beginning of it all.
Now, you've, as you suggested as well, you've kind of been in a variety of different coaching positions over the past 2 decades. I'm curious for somebody maybe who's new to coaching or coming into coaching, maybe doesn't have so much coaching experience. What is it that you feel that they need to know in order for them to be successful like yourself?
Well, I wish I could go back in time 20 years ago and learn more about it.
Which is why we asked the question, right?
Well, I probably still don't have some of the answers when it comes to politics and bureaucracy and those sort of things. But in terms of just pure coaching results, which has never been a problem for me, I guess. I think the thing that I intuitively or was just lucky to, I guess, have been built in, I guess, because of my father and the way I was raised was the relationship piece. And I don't think I fully understood it in the early days, and I'm probably still working hard to understand it better so that you do it really well. But, I don't even like the term coaching, because every role that you have is so different. And it's sort of such a generic term, but I think it's really a leadership role, and then you're doing whatever's required for what the group needs at that time. But I think it's, first and foremost, it's always about the relationships that you build with the individuals in the team, and then how you harness those individuals to make them a, cohesive collective group, and then what that relationship is that you have with that group, I suppose. And that's a pretty complex, big sort of piece, but that always comes first, I think, because if you have that strong and there's an intent and an understanding from everybody that you're working hard at that and it's a priority, I think it gives you a platform to do all the other things that you need to do, whatever that might be as a coach.
Well, let me follow up, because that's, the relationships aspect is a huge component that, across these interviews I hear time and time again. But one of the challenges is building those relationships. And you talked about working to build those relationships. So are there any specific things that you do to get to know your athletes, find out how you can best work with them and get the best out of them? Because it's a generic term, right? Working with the athletes or building relationships. So how do you do it?
Well, I think you do everything. You need to, like for me, you need to find out who they are, the context of how they got to this point in their life, and what this point is, what their aspirations are, what they're trying to achieve, what this team means to them. And again, that context and history of how they got there, because there's lots of information and things that can tell you about who they are, insecurities, all sorts of things which you need to understand to build that relationship and make sure it's strong. And then, it's everything: observing, talking to others, talking to them, listening, asking questions. And then it's about attention, making sure that you're constantly checking in, and not just to find out more about them and to understand them and to be able to help and be a part of their life, but to be constantly making sure that you're reaffirming that, you've got them, and that you're building that trust, and that every day they know that you're in their corner, and that you're somebody that they can, that that is supporting them and is there for them and is trying to understand them to help them belong to whatever you're doing, and also to contribute and to thrive in their own way. So I think it's all those things, and maybe that's still a generic, simple answer, but it's just everything, and it's being really attuned and aware of trying to piece that together and to constantly adapt and build and grow your understanding of who they are and why they're here and what they need from you.
When can I ask how many are on your current team? How many players?
Yeah, so I had an interesting year. The job, I moved from Perth, my home city, I guess. I was the high performance manager of Hockey Western Australia, which is it's a big state, big job, and I'm now working at a big private school in New Zealand, an amazing place. But that's a sort of different level. And part of what I did this year, I coached 2 of the school's teams, the first 11. And the junior, it's a year 7, 8 team, so a 12, 13-year-olds, the number 1 team in that age group, which is a good experience for the soul, but an amazingly different experience in terms of what they need from me. And I also coached a Premier League team in the the Auckland sort of regional Premier League called Somerville. We've got 8 black sticks in our squad, and so it's a serious hockey team and a serious hockey league in world hockey from a domestic league point of view. So I coached 3 teams 3 seasonal teams in 1 year, which even for me was a fair bit to bite and chew, especially in the constant adaptations of what COVID did to us, to everybody. So it was tough. Won't lie, I get tired coaching anyway because there's always more to do, but that definitely stretched me and took its toll on me. But so the Somerville group, we had a squad of 30. Okay. From 15-year-old talented, aspiring young kids, really talented, up to, ex-Black Sticks who are in their early 30s. So that was a really big roster. And then if you're looking at the scope of connection and responsibility, there was 19 girls that played in our first 11 team across the years. We had a couple of injuries and bits and pieces, and there was 16 in that year 7, 8 team. So you're looking at around 60 athletes, not including staff, on a weekly, daily, moment-by-moment basis that you're trying to juggle and manage to make sure that they're all getting constant attention, and that you're trying to process everything that you're observing and finding out to build those relationships, and then transfer that into looking after those 3 teams at the same time. So it's probably bigger than normal even for me, but that was the scale of it this year.
Yeah, and you almost answered the question, which is you have these large teams that are bigger than just the 11 on the pitch. Yeah. So how do you ensure that the players who may be not starting, who may be bit part players, get the same attention and support, even though they may not be the black stick, the superstar who's going to go on and do great things? It can be challenging, I think, as a coach, right? Because they're the ones who are going to get you the wins, but you have these others who can play a pivotal role in your team and should play, but they're not going to be the ones who are front and center. So how do you make sure that they get the time and attention just as much as somebody else who's in front of everybody?
Yeah, well, I think there's 2 traps there, but I think the first thing for me is I'm a believer in the sort of O-ring theory, where your team's success or failure is determined by your weakest links. So I'm not someone who thinks about that one player is going to save us and carry us. I think that thought process and that way of operating is detrimental to culture and your chances of being successful. I said the other day, I don't even know if this makes sense, but it's like no one's special, but everyone's special. And it's just this approach where no one's bigger than the team, but you're all as an individual, different, unique entity, important and special, and you're going to be treated that way. So that's the contradiction and the balance you're trying to look at. But then if you talk about the attention to the different athletes on that continuum, the 15-year-old up and coming kid and the ex-Black Stick or the current Black Stick, there's sort of two traps with that. One is that you spend all of your time with the 3 or 4 top players and you're building relationships with them, and you're buddies with them, and they're on your side, and that's all you do. And the other trap is that you just assume they know what they're doing, those black sticks and those senior players, and you spend all your time with the 15, 16-year-olds because you're trying to teach them and trying to get them up to speed. And I think both of those places are not ideal. I think you need to understand the time in terms of the situation of the team's needs, because that might determine where your attention needs to be. If you've got to win on the weekend and whatever the requirements are and so forth. But I think as a general rule, they all need attention. And one of the things I talk about a lot in the different coaching workshops and education things I do, especially for the FIH, Federation of International Hockey, is I do this thing I call a relationship matrix. And it's essentially just a grid with all the athletes you're responsible for. And I've got this sort of shorthand sort of symbol thing, and I'm tracking, how they're traveling in their life, whether they played on the weekend, whether they played poorly, when was the last time I made contact with them, what I know about their personality and what they need from me. Are they one that doesn't want a lot of attention, they're a bit aloof, or they need a certain type of attention? Do they need to be reaffirmed because they're not confident? Do they need to just be knocked down a bit because, their lack of humility gets the best of them at times, all those sort of things. And that allows me to keep a visual of what I'm doing, and then also plan. It might be that I haven't spoken to someone for a week, so I'll send them a message, or it might be that I need to get to training early because I know they come in this side, and I'll deliberately accidentally run into them so we can have a conversation and talk about stuff. So I'm very targeted and planned, or I try to be, around how I give that attention and how often and what it looks like and so forth.
Well, I'm going to be asking you for a copy of that when we go offline, because it sounds fascinating. I love to see it, and I hope anybody who else is interested will contact you. We'll give Jason's contact information at the end. One of the things you talked about was coaching multiple teams, and you said it's a lot even for me. And I'm wondering how does Jason stay balanced with the number of teams he's working with the number of athletes he's having to work with across levels, males, females? How do you stay mentally and physically well?
Well, that's a lifelong challenge for me. And I think one of the things that I was really poor at in my early days was not looking after myself at all. And I think there's lots of, there's a conversation now or in recent times around the importance of coaches and leaders looking after themselves. And that once they get past a certain point, all their extra efforts, not sleeping and trying to make sure there's no stone unturned, you actually lose your effectiveness, because your decision-making and how you're carrying yourself and all those things start to erode because you're just not in a good place. So I'm getting much better at that. But there's still times when you're just under the pump, and when you're coaching 3 teams, which is not realistic, and I wouldn't advise anyone to do that. It is what it is. There's just things you got to do, and so you've just got to plow through sometimes. I think my advice is you've got to be really, you've got to understand what your scale of influence can be and what you can manage at a high level, because I think I did a good job this year. Like the Somerville women were minor premiers, Auckland premiers, intercity premiers. The first 11 won a bronze and a silver medal and lost both games in a shootout. And it was a young emerging group. So they sort of.
Uh-oh. Looks like we just lost Jason.
There's not a lot of losing going on in that season, but there's no doubt I'm lucky because I'm experienced, and in those levels I'm pretty well equipped to do those jobs well. But there's no doubt that what you're doing for each team is diluted because you're stretched. So I think you've got to understand how scalable is that influence and what does that look like, and then then if you have to do that, you've got to try and get good people around you that you can, I don't like the word delegate, but you can work with to share that responsibility to make sure that everybody's looked after and at the level that you need to, for everyone to get what they should, and for the teams that you're responsible and the individuals you're responsible for can work at an optimal level.
Now, I've no doubt that you've had some very high highs, and you talked about a couple of those, but also some lows. And I'm just curious, as a coach, how do you deal with the bad outcomes, the things that don't go well? How do you get through that in a way that maybe doesn't necessarily make you better, but allows you to understand that coaching is a long-term career and it's not based on the results that happened last weekend?
Yeah, so I think it's hard for any young coach, and especially people that are ambitious. I actually think ambition is a problem for being a coach, because you make decisions based on short-term success because you think you're trying to fill your CV and you're trying to, get your head above water and be noticed and get the next job and all those things. And there's a lot of ego attached in that, and there's a lot of short-termism, which is not good for anyone. And it's really easy to say that once you've been through the show and you've won medals and you've achieved a lot of the things that you thought would never be in your grasp as a coach anyway, and you feel quite content, I suppose. But I think if you can get to that place earlier, or maybe you're just a different beast and you understand that having a long-term approach with everything is critical to being a good coach, because anything that connects back to short-term is going to affect your behavior and your decision-making, which will always affect the experience for the people you're responsible for. And in my mind, it always at least has the potential to be detrimental for, retaining people in the sport, for how they perceive themselves going forward once they're out of your, regime or whatever. And so getting to that point and understanding that is a really important part of being a good leader, I think.
When you're looking at those that you hire to work with you, assistants, staff, et cetera, are there specific things that you look for that complement your own coaching style? Or is it a case of, I'm going to find people who are different to me and may contradict what I think in order to get an opposing view that whereby I might be wrong, and I've got to listen to the other side?
Yeah, it always amuses me when you get coaching roles and some organizations tell you who your assistant's going to be, and they're like, oh, we've got this manager for you and those things. So I think the first thing is you've got to find people that understand you and can supplement the things that you're not good at, or the things that you need that you either miss or can be problems because of who you are. So you've got to find the right fit around you. A team's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle that all needs to be from the same box and connect in a way that fits really neatly. And I don't work with people I don't know well, or I don't have sometimes you just jump in like a school job and you've got to find people quickly, but I'll always do my homework and talk to people I trust if I can around who they are and how they're going to fit and how they'll work with me. Early days I've had some crashes where that just hasn't worked, where you've either just quickly jumped into bringing someone in without doing your homework or understanding who each other is, or you've been handed someone, then that can be a real problem for the team and for your performance and how you operate. So I think that's really important, that the head coach has to have at least input into who their staff are going to be, and preferably they should make the decisions, I think. Otherwise, you're on a hiding to nothing or in trouble before you start, I suppose. And then in terms of, the push and pull, and one of the great examples, I've got a great mate of mine who I've done a lot of coaching with, a guy named Hitendra Patel. And Hitu's great skill is that we see the world the same, and yet in the same conversation he has the skill, and I guess we both do, of challenging everything that each other's thinking. So you've got this constant narrative around living on the same planet or swimming in the same ocean, and yet we're constantly challenging each other on everything and challenging everything that we think we know or the world's doing or the world knows. So we're very like-minded, but we're very comfortable in being really open with each other about that challenge and that constant test. Sorry, mate. So that's a unique situation, but that's the sort of thing you're looking for. I think you're trying to find.
To me, it sounds like the people that you're looking for are those who you've networked in some way, and it's a theme that I've seen a lot of over the past several months of doing interviews. Is yes, you have to have the CV that justifies you having the job, but it's important that you've made those connections with coaches, with team owners or administrators, whoever it is, so that it's not a who is this person, I've never heard of them, their CV looks good, but it's a risk because we don't know anything about them. Is that something that you'd recommend? Is those young coaches networking with people like yourselves in order to build that contact list, I guess?
Yeah, I think networking is something that I never really understood, or I didn't work at in a structured way when I was a younger coach. And I think that's really important for young coaches to understand, that you've got to build that network so that you can attach yourself to people that can provide different knowledge and experiences and maybe opportunities. But then the other piece is you got to, like, CVs are CVs. Like, we can write whatever we want on them. You've got to do your homework with people that you trust, with that network you've built, and find out the glory guts of who people are and what they think and how they behave. And then I think if possible, you need to spend time with them, even going and observing them in their environments and doing different bits and pieces so that you can learn as much about the essence of who they truly are, because that's what's really important, not their CV or what they're trying to portray to the world. They're often two very different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the discussions we had before we started the interview was social media, which can be a great way to network with people such as yourself. I mean, I found you through social media, and it's a great avenue to meet new people and get new experiences, but it can also be dangerous. Maybe you spend too much time on it or post things that you shouldn't. Where's the balance in that?
Yeah, I shouldn't have mentioned this to you before we started this interview. I think social media and technology are massive problems, especially for our kids and just society in general. And I'm not an expert, but I've read the books and watched The Social Dilemma, and I'm a big reader, and I try and sort of educate myself. And I think there's lots of reasons to be really concerned, especially when we understand how these things are being built and who they're being built by, neurobiologists and scientists and some really smart people who are basically finding ways to make sure that we never leave these screens, and when you have virtual reality and all these other things that are coming, I wonder if living in those screens and those worlds and how that affects our brains and the dopamine hits and all the bits and pieces, how we can compete with that in the real world and what that'll mean for everybody with what life looks like going forward. The problem for coaches and teams and education and those things in the short term is that they're really efficient and effective ways to communicate. And so they are tools that make life easier in terms of how you can work together and build yourself as a group, I suppose. WhatsApp's an amazing thing where you can do a whole range of things really quickly and collaborate and consult and so forth. And there's a million tools. We all found, I suppose, during COVID, the power of not having to drive somewhere and have a meeting, and how effective the online platforms like Zoom and these sort of things can be to quickly being able to collaborate and work together without all the other stress footprints around travel and sitting in a building and all those sort of things. So I don't really know the answer, mate. I know that it's a problem for society. It's something I'm really conscious of in terms of how I operate. Really concerned and conscious about my own kids and watching them. I watched my daughter Grace walk around watching an iPad movie while she's texting or talking to mates on WhatsApp, and walking to go and sit in front of the TV type thing, you know. So these kids are even multitasking in these screens. And unfortunately, that's the world they live in. I should have said while she's trying to do a TikTok dance, because that's the thing. That's outside my lane, but so they're immersed and addicted and living in those spaces. But that's also where that's communicate and hang out. You know, they don't drive to the mall and walk around and pretend to shop and spend time together. They just plug in and go into these virtual rooms. You know, I watch my son play. I think it's Fortnite, and there's all these mates, like their names are on the screen. I'm like, oh, what are they doing? And it's like, oh, well, me and so are playing, and they're just hanging out and talking. And I'm like, so, you know, they're, instead of being outside playing, they're watching their mates play a video game, and they're living in this they're spending time together as a group, socializing in this virtual space, you know. So I don't know the answers, but I think it's something we need to keep wrestling with, because I'm not comfortable with the path that it's taking us, I guess.
And I think it's a challenge as well for coaches such as you and I, who maybe weren't raised in that generation of, you know, electronics in our hand growing up, where we have to interact and kind of meet the needs of these young athletes who have different ideas and different understandings of technology and how it's used. And yet we don't have that, and yet we still have to understand that this is who they are. And while we may not agree with it or like it, and I'm on board with you in that sense, it's one of those things that exists right now. And so how do we meet the needs of those athletes when that's how they do communicate?
Yeah, and you know, the power of things like Huddle and being able to use techniques like flip learning and sending a clip on WhatsApp or in Huddle and people making comments, and like the power now for this generation around their ability to educate themselves and to contribute to the education of a group, if you like, is just amazing. So you don't want to not use those tools. And as you sort of said, you can't pry them out of that virtual world, because that's the world they've been brought up in, and that's the world they live in. So I think you've got to responsibly utilize it, because it helps you do your job better. But I think you've just got to try and constantly be pondering it and being aware of it, so that you're at least wrestling it for the greater good, if you can. I don't know, it's a bit like holding back the tide to a degree, but at least for me, I feel better if I'm at least wrestling with it, but not knowing if I'm making a difference or changing anything, if you like.
Well, just to wrap up, if you're looking at coaching as a whole, and those who may be in our program that are new coaches or just starting out in their careers looking to get into coaching, do you have any specific advice that you've learned along the way that you feel they should be aware of now?
I think one of the things that I was really lucky with was that I had jobs early on in sort of places that weren't expected to be successful or highly successful. And I guess because of how I was wired, that didn't force me, but my approach to that was to be, I guess, to try and be quite innovative and to be different and to find different ways to try and make ground, or, you know, the David and Goliath thing, reframe the battle or change the battleground, and just sort of be brave enough to think outside the square and try things, because the cost of getting it wrong was going to be the same as sort of what the expected performance was anyway. And I got a lot of success from that approach early on, but also what it did was it taught me a lot about the game and about coaching and that whole environment, because that experience, you know, you can read books and you can self-educate yourself, which I would advise as well, but trying things and building a diverse knowledge of how things work and the mechanics of it, to me, has been the sort of most powerful gift that I've been given because of the situation that I started in. Because, you know, you talk about a structure or a way of playing or a way of doing game briefs or teaching or you name it. There's a fair chance I've tried it and failed at it or succeeded at it, or at least now be able to unpack it and explain it to you and give you the pros and cons, and that sort of experience is hard to get unless you're lucky enough to maybe start that way, or be brave enough to, I guess, to fulfill your own curiosity to try all those things. So I think be curious and be brave, and don't just follow the herd, because if you're following what's good at the time, then you're probably, in a safe bet, you might do okay because you know it works because everyone else is doing it, but you're not going to be successful because you're following someone else's path. So you've got to find a way to get ahead of the curve and be willing to risk your own, I guess, intelligence and beliefs and so forth to try and get to that spot, because that's the only place where, I guess, the ultimate success lies, I think.
Great response. And I know a lot of people watch these after the live interview. So if anybody does have a question for you, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, as we discussed, because I keep deleting social media and turning those things off, probably my email address, mate, which I think you've got, is probably the best way. I don't look at it a lot. That's my personal one. But, yeah, I definitely dive in there at least once a week. So that's probably the best way to get to me, I guess.
Okay. And for those of you listening to the podcast, it's 22 Butcher, BUTCHERJ @gmail.com. Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining me and sharing a little bit of your insight and wisdom and volunteering to do this. I really do appreciate it.
Not a problem, mate. My pleasure. Yeah. Thank you.
And just a reminder, of course, that we try and do one of these at least once a week. So if you haven't yet, go on our YouTube channel and be sure to subscribe so that you get notification when we do go live. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, and of course, Jason Butcher, thank you so much for watching.